Two sisters arrive in the dusty town of Dry Creek, only to find their inherited ranch marked for ruin. Local power broker Haynes will stop at nothing to drive them off, so he can claim the land for himself. But an unexpected alliance with the reclusive rancher Thomas Reed turns the fight in their favor. And just wait until you see how this standoff ends, and why justice at last claimed the final word. The sun hung low and heavy, painting the horizon in shades of gold and copper. Its heat lay on the land like a weight, pressing down until the air itself shimmered. A thin ribbon of dust rose behind a wagon as it creaked along the road toward the edge of Dry Creek, the wooden wheels groaning in protest with every rut and stone. Two mules, long-suffering and steady, leaned into their harnesses, their sides streaked with sweat and powdery dirt. On the bench, Joanne Callahan held the reins with the calm precision of someone who knew that hesitation on the trail could mean trouble. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a plain bonnet, her jaw set in a way that allowed no guessing at her thoughts. Beside her, Mary sat quiet, one hand resting on the folded letter in her lap, the other gripping the brim of her hat whenever the wind rose. The letter's edges were worn from being read too many times. Inside, in neat handwriting, was a promise from an uncle they had never met, a promise of a ranch, abandoned, but theirs if they were willing to take it on. As they neared the town's main street, the wagon's iron-bound wheels clattered against the hard-packed earth. A few locals turned their heads from under the shade of wide-brimmed hats. Outside the saloon, men lounged on the porch, boots propped against railings, their eyes following the wagon. Murmurs passed between them like drifting smoke. "That ranch! No one's kept it going since old Callahan passed," one man said with a smirk. Another spat into the dust and replied, "They'll be gone before the month's out." At the far end of the street, leaning on a hitching post outside the general store, stood Thomas Reed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sun-creased face, he watched the sisters with an expression as still as the desert before a storm. Once, his land had been green with grazing cattle, his days loud with the sounds of work and laughter. Now the years had left their mark. Fences sagged, fields lay untended, and the light in his eyes had faded. He let the wagon pass without a word, telling himself strangers were no concern of his. Joanne felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken doubt. She knew what they saw. Two women, road-weary and thin on resources, headed toward a stretch of land most folks had given up on. She kept her chin high, meeting no one's eyes, steering the mules until the noise of town fell away behind them. The road to the ranch was little more than a track worn into the earth, winding between dry fields dotted with stubborn mesquite. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and sage rustling through the brittle grass. In the far distance, the low outline of the ranch house appeared, faded, leaning but still standing against the horizon. Mary shifted beside her. "Do you think we can make it work?" she asked, her voice almost lost to the wind. Joanne's fingers tightened around the reins. "We don't have another choice," she said, her tone calm but certain. And the mules trudged onward, their slow hoofbeats marking the first steps toward a future neither of them could yet see, under a sky too wide to measure. The first morning on the ranch broke cool and gray, but the chill faded quickly under the rising sun. The sisters stepped outside to find the land waiting, not welcoming, not hostile, simply there, in all its rough indifference. The fence line stretched in both directions, boards warped and leaning, wire sagging in loose curves. Beyond it lay open ground patched with dry grass and thorny brush. Joanne examined the tools they'd brought from town, a hammer, a coil of wire, a tin of nails so old the heads were coated in rust. The boards near the gate crumbled under her touch. "We start here," she said, and drove the first nail with the careful force of someone who knew every strike would count. By midday, the sun was high, and the work had turned from steady effort into a trial of endurance. Dust clung to their skin, sweat stung their eyes, and each nail seemed harder to drive than the last. Joanne tore her glove on a splinter, leaving a thin cut along her palm. Mary caught her hand. "You should wrap it," she said. Joanne only shook her head and kept working. The ranch did not give ground easily. Weeds knotted themselves around the posts, and the wind snatched up any board not held firm. When the sun reached its peak, Mary called Joanne to the shade of the porch. From the kitchen came the scent of onions and herbs simmering in a pot, her first meal on this land meant to feed them after the long day. As the broth cooked, a figure appeared along the fence. An older man, lean and weathered, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He carried a battered toolbox and moved with the ease of someone long accustomed to the weight of a hammer. It was Sam, an old ranch hand who had once worked for their uncle. "I've been watching from the ridge," he said, resting the toolbox on the ground. "Most folks would have turned back by now." He lifted the lid, revealing coils of clean wire, nails bright and sharp, and a hammer with a worn handle. "Figured you could use these." Mary thanked him with a shy smile. Joanne only nodded, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. They worked through the afternoon alongside Sam, the rhythm of hammer on wood echoing across the open land. By sunset, a short stretch of the fence stood straight and solid. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. As they sat on the porch with bowls of stew, the sky burned orange and violet over the horizon. For the first time since arriving, the ranch felt less like a burden and more like a place they might one day call home. Night came to the ranch like the slow pull of a blanket over the land. The wind quieted and the sky above stretched deep and endless, scattered with stars. Joanne and Mary had been working along the far fence since the afternoon, determined to finish a section before the next day's heat. Lantern light spilled over the posts, casting long shadows on the dry ground. The rhythm of their work was steady, the metallic ring of the hammer, the soft rasp of wire drawn tight. Joanne straightened to stretch her back, glancing across the open field. The horizon was a dark line, still and silent. Then, from that stillness, came a sharp crack. It was a sound that didn't belong to the night, sudden, cutting, echoing across the open space. Joanne's hat jerked back as the brim tore away, carried off by the wind. Mary froze, her breath caught, the hammer slipping from her hand. For a moment neither moved. The lantern's flame flickered in the slight breeze, their eyes scanning the dark. The land gave nothing back but silence. Joanne stepped closer to her sister, voice low but firm. "Inside, now." They crossed the yard quickly, the gravel crunching under their boots. Behind them, the fence stood unfinished, a few boards hanging loose. They were met halfway by Thomas Reed, who had ridden in fast enough for his horse to be flecked with foam. He dismounted in one motion, eyes sharp as he scanned the darkness beyond the fence. "You two didn't imagine that," he said quietly. "It was a warning, and I know who sent it." Mary looked from him to Joanne, searching for some measure of calm. Joanne's jaw was tight, but she kept her voice even. "Why would anyone care about an old fence?" Thomas met her gaze. "It's not the fence. It's the land. Haynes has been trying to get it for years, and he figures scaring you off is easier than making a fair offer." Joanne glanced back toward the field, the stars above it cold and bright. "Then he's picked the wrong people." Thomas studied her for a moment as if weighing something. Then he nodded once. "You'll need more than a hammer to keep this place." That night, the sisters locked the doors, their lanterns burning low. Outside, the ranch lay under a blanket of quiet, but it was not the same quiet as before. Now it held the knowledge that someone had marked them, and that their fight for this land had only just begun. Morning broke with a sharp, dry wind that rattled the half-mended fence line. Joanne and Mary rose before the sun, knowing they had to finish repairing the section closest to the road. The boards were laid out, nails lined in neat rows, the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood. By mid-morning, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance. At first, it was faint, no more than a smudge against the pale sky, but the way it moved, steady, straight, made Joanne's shoulders tense. She set her hammer down and shaded her eyes. 3 riders emerged from the haze. They came at an easy pace, but there was nothing casual in the way they sat in their saddles. All 3 wore dusters that flapped in the wind, their hats pulled low. Even at a distance, Joanne could feel the weight of their gaze. Mary stepped up beside her. "Do you think—" "I think we're about to find out," Joanne interrupted, her tone steady. The riders halted just beyond the fence. The one in front, a tall man with a narrow face, leaned forward in his saddle. "This land's not worth the trouble, ladies," he called, his voice carrying across the dry air. "Best pack up and head back where you came from." Joanne didn't move. "This land isn't for sale." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet." He swung down from his horse and began to walk toward the fence. The other 2 followed, boots crunching in the dirt. One of them carried a coil of wire cutters, letting them swing lazily from his hand. Mary's pulse quickened. She stepped back toward the house, but kept her eyes on the men. Joanne stood her ground, the hammer still loose in her grip. The wind seemed to still for a moment, as though the land itself was watching. Then came the sound of hooves from the west. Fast. Measured. Thomas Reed rode in at a gallop, his coat snapping behind him. He reined in sharply between the fence and the riders, his horse kicking up a swirl of dust. "Morning," Thomas said evenly, but his gaze was locked on the man with the cutters. "If you've come to work, I've got a spare hammer. If not, you're wasting daylight." The narrow-faced man tilted his head. "Not your land, Reed." Thomas's voice hardened. "It is now. I'm helping them see it's worth keeping." For a long moment, no one moved. The riders glanced at each other, the air thick with the choice they were about to make. Then the leader gave a slow smile, one that spoke of unfinished business. "We'll be seeing you." They mounted up and turned back the way they came, their departure marked by the fading thud of hooves. The dust they left behind settled slowly, drifting over the newly mended boards. Joanne exhaled, her grip on the hammer finally loosening. "They'll be back." Thomas nodded once. "Then we'll be ready." The rest of the day passed in a steady rhythm of work. The three of them, Joanne, Mary, and Thomas, repaired the last boards and stretched new wire until the fence stood straight against the horizon. When the final nail was set, the sun was dipping low, casting long golden shadows across the land. That evening, they ate together on the porch. The wind had eased, carrying the scent of sage from the far hills. For the first time, there was a quiet sense of unity among them, not spoken, but solid, like the fence they had built. The ranch was still theirs for now, and as long as they stood together, it would stay that way. Dawn broke soft and gold, the kind of morning that made the dust look like powdered sunlight. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dew on dry grass. For the first time since the sisters had arrived, the ranch felt still. Not the stillness of abandonment, but the calm that follows a long, hard fight. Joanne stepped onto the porch, coffee tin warm in her hands, and looked out over the fence line. The boards stood straight, the wire tight. Beyond them, the land stretched in gentle rises toward the distant hills. She remembered how it had looked their first day, leaning posts, sagging wire, weeds curling over the gate. Now it was the beginning of something new. Mary was in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and the aroma of fresh bread spilling through the open window. She hummed quietly, a tune neither of them had sung in years. The sound carried across the yard, mingling with the slow creak of the porch boards under Thomas Reed's step. He had been up before dawn, riding the far edge of the property to check the fence line. When he returned, dust clung to the hem of his coat, but there was a lighter set to his shoulders. He leaned against the porch post, looking out over the land in silence. Mary appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Breakfast is ready," she said, her eyes glancing toward Thomas as if unsure whether to add more. Joanne set down her coffee. "We can mend fences and cook too," she said with a wry half-smile. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind brushing across the dry grass. Then Thomas's gaze shifted from the fields to the sisters. The corner of his mouth lifted, not much, but enough to soften the weathered lines of his face. It was the first smile they had seen from him, and in it was something unspoken. Respect, gratitude, and the faint, cautious hope that maybe life on this land still held promise. They ate together at the rough-hewn table on the porch, the morning sun warming their faces. Conversation was easy, touched with small laughter. The day ahead was full of work, mending, planting, tending, but it no longer felt like a burden carried alone. Out in the distance, a hawk circled above the fields, its shadow gliding over the fence line. The ranch was theirs, and for the first time since stepping off the wagon, the sisters felt not just like survivors, but like part of the land itself. The smile lingered on Thomas's face as he looked toward the horizon. He had thought this place was done giving him reasons to hope. He realized now he'd been wrong.